This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy. Just drop in some details about yourself and see if you're eligible to save money when you bundle your home and auto policies. The process only takes minutes, and it could mean hundreds more in your pocket. Visit Progressive.com after this episode to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states.
For more than a century, guests at one of Washington, D.C.'s most elegant hotels have reported strange things happening inside its walls. Lights are said to switch on and off for no clear reason. Doors are said to open and close by themselves. Chandeliers reportedly sway without explanation. Some have even described the faint smell of almonds in the air, or the feeling that a woman is nearby. Many believe that presence belongs to Marian Hooper Adams, better remembered as Clover Adams. But there is one problem with that story. Clover Adams died in 1885. The Hay Adams Hotel did not exist until decades later. So if Clover Adams haunts the Hay Adams, what exactly is she haunting? The building, the land, or the memory of a tragedy that Washington never fully forgot? Today, we're taking a closer look at the history, the claims, the timeline, and the lingering mystery of the Hay Adams Hotel. Hello and welcome to Haunted Thursday, a series from the Halloween podcast. I am your host, Lyle Perez. Each week on Haunted Thursday, we explore a haunted location, ghost story, or paranormal mystery, and examine the history behind it. We look at what happened, who experienced it, what evidence has been reported, and why people are still talking about it today. For this Haunted Thursday, we're heading to Washington, D.C., to investigate one of the capital's most elegant and historic hotels. This is the story of the Hay Adams Hotel and the ghost said to be Clover Adams. Before we can talk about the ghost stories, we need to talk about the place itself. The Hay Adams Hotel sits near Lafayette Square, just steps from the White House, in one of the most historic areas of Washington, D.C. It's the kind of place where history doesn't feel distant. It feels like it is right outside the window. Today, the hotel is known for its luxury, its views, and its connection to old Washington society. Guests stay there for the elegance, the location, and the feeling of being surrounded by power, politics, and history. But long before the Hay Adams became a hotel, the land was connected to two important men, John Hay and Henry Adams. John Hay served as private secretary to Abraham Lincoln and later became Secretary of State. Henry Adams was an author, historian, and member of one of America's most famous political families. Their homes stood near one another, and together, those homes became part of the social and intellectual life of Washington. But the story we are looking at today is not only about John Hay or Henry Adams. It is about Henry's wife, Marian Hooper Adams. The newspapers of her time usually called her Marian Adams, Mrs. Marian Adams, or Mrs. Henry Adams. But to family, friends, and later history, she became better known by another name, Clover. And it is Clover Adams whose name became attached to the ghost story of the Hay Adams Hotel. But before we get to the reports of lights, doors, chandeliers, almond scents, and unexplained presences, we need to understand who Clover Adams was, what happened to her, and why a hotel built long after her death became connected to her memory. To understand the ghost story connected to the Hay Adams Hotel, we first need to understand the woman at the center of it, Her name was Marian Hooper Adams. She was born into a prominent Boston family and later became part of Washington society through her marriage to Henry Adams. But she was not just a name attached to someone else's story. She was intelligent, creative, observant, and remembered by those close to her as someone with a strong presence of her own. Most people who know her story today know her by another name, Clover. That name matters because it gives us a small glimpse of the person behind the formal record. In the newspapers of her time, she was usually identified as Marian Adams, Mrs. Marian Adams, or Mrs. Henry Adams. That was common in the 1800s, especially for women connected to well-known men. Publicly, she was often described through her marriage. Privately, to family and friends, she was Clover. Clover married Henry Adams in 1872. Henry came from one of America's most famous families. He was the grandson of President John Quincy Adams and the great-grandson of President John Adams. He was a historian, writer, teacher, and intellectual, and he moved through some of the most powerful circles in the country. But Clover was not simply standing in Henry's shadow. She had her own interests, her own personality, and her own place in Washington life. She was known as witty and sharp, and she became part of a social world filled with writers, politicians, diplomats, and thinkers. This was Washington not only as a seat of government, but as a city of private conversations, dinner parties, influence, and reputation. Clover was also interested in photography, which was still a demanding and technical art during her lifetime. It was not as simple as taking out a phone or pressing a button. Photography involved equipment, preparation, chemicals, and patience. It required someone willing to learn the process and work carefully with a medium that was still developing. That detail becomes important later, because the chemicals connected to photography would eventually become part of the story of Clover's death, and her death would become part of the reason her name was remembered at all. That is one of the difficult things about telling this story. It is easy for the haunting to overshadow the person. Clover becomes the woman in the hallway, the presence in the hotel, the possible ghost connected to a faint smell of almonds. But before any of that, she was a real woman living in a real world. She had friends, she had family, she had talent, she had struggles, and she had a life that was more than the tragedy attached to her name. In December of 1885, the story of Marian Clover Adams took a tragic turn. From the outside, Clover and Henry Adams seemed connected to the very center of American influence. Henry came from one of the most famous families in the country. Their life in Washington placed them near politics, literature, history, and society. But inside that world, Clover was struggling. Newspaper reports from the time described her as having been in poor health and suffering from what they called mental depression. We have to remember the language of the 1880s was different from the way we talk about mental health today. Depression, grief, anxiety, and emotional suffering were often described in vague terms. People did not always have the words, understanding, or compassion we would hope for now. According to the accounts, Henry Adams had gone out for a walk. While he was away, a visitor came to the house. When Henry returned, he went upstairs and found Clover unconscious. Doctors were called, but they couldn't revive her. Clover Adams died on December 6, 1885. At first, the public announcement reportedly gave heart disease as the cause of death. But later newspaper accounts stated that the death certificate connected her death to potassium cyanide. Reports also noted that an empty file was found and that the poison was connected to the chemicals used in photography. That detail is why her interest in photography matters. The same creative practice that showed Clover's artistic and curious side also explains how such a dangerous chemical could have been present in her life. This is the part of the story that has to be handled with care. Before Clover Adams became part of a hotel legend, before people spoke of lights flickering or doors moving or a ghostly woman at the Hay Adams, she was a real person. Her death was not a spooky detail. It was a human tragedy. It shocked the people around her, and it left a deep mark on Henry Adams. One of the things that stands out in the old newspaper accounts is how formal they are. They don't refer to her as Clover in those reports. They used her formal names. That was the public language of the time. It gives us the facts, but it keeps the person at a distance. And maybe that distance is part of why the story still feels so haunting. The public record tells us what happened. It gives us the date, the names, and the medical details. But it can't fully tell us what was happening inside Clover's mind. It can't tell us what Henry felt when he found her. And it can't tell us how that house felt in the days that followed. After her death, Henry Adams commissioned sculptor Augustus St. Gaudens to create a memorial for Clover in Rock Creek Cemetery. That memorial would later become widely known as Grief, though Henry himself did not call it that. The monument is quiet, seated, solemn, and mysterious. It doesn't explain the pain. It simply holds it. So, in a way, Clover has two places attached to her legend: the cemetery, where she was memorialized, and the hotel built over the world she left behind. The memorial became part of Clover's legacy. It turned private mourning into public art. People who knew nothing about her life could stand before it and feel the weight of something unresolved. Sadness, stillness, distance, mystery. And this is where the story begins to shift from history into legend. Clover died in 1885. Henry Adams lived for more than 30 years after her death. But her memory remained tied to him, to the house, to the cemetery, and eventually to the place where the Hay Adams Hotel would be built. Henry Adams lived for more than 30 years after Clover's death. In that time, he continued to write, travel, and remain connected to the intellectual world of his era. But Clover's death never fully disappeared from his story. Her memory remained tied to him, tied to the home they had known, and tied to the memorial he created for her in Rock Creek Cemetery. Henry Adams died on March 27, 1918, in Washington, D.C. Newspaper reports from the time described him as an author, historian, Harvard-educated scholar, and member of one of America's most famous families. He had lived a long life surrounded by history, both through the family he came from and the work he left behind. But even in reports of Henry's death, Clover appears again. The newspapers mentioned his wife and the St. Gaudens Memorial in Rock Creek Cemetery, the monument many people had come to know as Grief. More than 30 years after her death, Clover was still part of the way Henry Adams was remembered. That matters, because the ghost story of the Hay Adams Hotel is not just built on one tragic event, it's built on memory. Clover's memory remained attached to Henry. It remained attached to the Adams name. It remained attached to Rock Creek Cemetery. And eventually, it became attached to the hotel that would rise near the place where the Adams and Hay homes once stood. But this is where the timeline becomes important. By the time Henry Adams died in 1918, the Hay Adams Hotel still didn't exist. Clover had died in 1885. Henry died in 1918. The hotel came later, so the haunting can't honestly be told as if Clover lived in the Hay Adams Hotel or died there. She didn't. Henry didn't live in the hotel either. Their world was the older world of private homes, social gatherings, Washington politics, writers, diplomats, and carefully arranged rooms near Lafayette Square. The hotel came after that world had already begun to disappear. By the late 1920s, The old homes connected to Hay and Adams had given way to something new. A hotel rose near 16th and H Streets Northwest, carrying both names, Hay and Adams. By 1928, the Hay Adams appears in hotel listings, giving us a clear marker in the timeline. And that timeline changes the entire ghost story. If Clover Adams haunts the Hay Adams, she isn't haunting it because she knew the hotel in life. She's not haunting a room she slept in or a hallway she walked through as a guest. The connection has to be deeper than that. It has to be about whether grief can remain attached to a place, even after the original building is gone. That is what makes this story different from a lot of haunted hotel legends. It's not as simple as someone dying in a hotel room and becoming the ghost of that room. In this case, the hotel came later. The story underneath it came first. So maybe the better question is not, why would Clover Adams haunt a hotel? Maybe the better question is, can a place remain haunted after the building changes? Can a story survive demolition? Those are the questions at the heart of the Hay Adams legend. And with the timeline in place, we can finally turn to the haunting claims themselves. The haunting connected to the Hay Adams Hotel isn't usually described as violent or terrifying. It's quieter than that. More subtle. More like the kind of thing that would make a guest stop, look around the room, and wonder if they're really alone. Some guests and staff have reported lights turning on and off without explanation. Others have described doors opening and closing by themselves. There are stories of chandeliers swaying when there doesn't seem to be any reason for them to move. Some accounts mention the faint smell of almonds in the air, appearing suddenly and disappearing just as quickly. And then there are the reports of a female presence, sometimes seen, sometimes only felt. Over time, many of these stories have been connected to Clover Adams. The almond scent is one of the more unsettling details because of how it connects back to the tragedy of Clover's death. Potassium cyanide is often associated with a bitter almond odor, though not everyone can smell it. So when people report the smell of almonds in the hotel, some connect it to Clover, as if the circumstances of her death have somehow become part of the haunting itself. But we need to be careful here. A smell in a hotel can come from many things: perfume, cleaning products, food, flowers, old wood, air circulation, or even suggestion. Once someone knows the story, the mind starts making connections. A faint scent becomes meaningful. A flickering light becomes personal. A moving door becomes a message. That doesn't mean people are lying. It doesn't mean they didn't experience something. It just means haunted places are complicated. They're built from history, memory, expectation, atmosphere, and sometimes things people genuinely can't explain. The reported activity at the Hay Adams fits the mood of the place. This isn't a ruined asylum, an abandoned prison, or a crumbling house at the end of a dirt road. It's a luxury hotel near the White House. It's polished, quiet, and historic. So if there is a haunting, it seems to match the setting. It doesn't crash through the halls. It lingers at the edge of the room. It turns a light on. It moves a door. It leaves behind a scent. And maybe that's why the story has lasted. The ghost of Clover Adams isn't usually described as something monstrous. She's not presented as angry or vengeful. The legend feels more melancholy than frightening. A woman connected to loss. A presence tied to memory. A life that ended tragically, and a name that somehow remained attached to the place. For believers, this is where the idea of a location haunting becomes important. If Clover died before the hotel existed, then maybe she's not haunting the hotel as a building. Maybe she's attached to the site. Maybe the land remembers the Adams home. Maybe the grief connected to that place remained even after the old walls were gone, and a new building rose in their place. For skeptics, the explanation may be simpler. The hotel inherited a powerful story. It stands on land connected to famous people, old Washington society, and a tragic death. Guests hear the legend, staff repeat it, writers include it in books. Over time, ordinary hotel experiences become part of the Clover Adams story. Lights flicker, doors move, a chandelier sways, someone smells almonds, and suddenly the past feels present. That's one of the most interesting things about haunted hotels. They're places of constant movement. Guests come and go. Rooms change hands. Staff work late hours. Buildings settle. Elevators hum. Air moves through long hallways. Every sound has the potential to feel like something more, especially when the person hearing it already knows the place is supposed to be haunted. The Hay Adams has all the ingredients for that kind of legend: a historic location, a tragic figure, a famous family, a hotel full of atmosphere, a haunting quiet enough to be believable, but strange enough to be remembered. Maybe Clover Adams became the emotional center of the hotel's ghost story because she gives the haunting a face, a name, a tragedy. Without her, a flickering light is just a flickering light. A moving door is just a moving door. A strange scent is just a strange scent. But with Clover, those details become part of a larger story about memory, grief, and old Washington. When we look at the Hay Adams haunting from a skeptical point of view, the first thing we have to acknowledge is that the timeline creates a real problem for the simplest version of the legend. Clover Adams didn't die in the Hay Adams Hotel. So if someone tells the story as if Clover was once a guest or resident of the hotel and then became its ghost, that version doesn't hold up. The dates don't allow it. But that doesn't mean the legend has no foundation. It just means the story is more complicated than the easy version. The skeptical explanation would be that the hotel inherited a story from the land. The Hay Adams stands in a part of Washington already filled with history. The names Hay and Adams connect the building to powerful families, old homes, and a social world that no longer exists in the same way. Add in the tragic death of Clover Adams, the famous memorial in Rock Creek Cemetery, and the atmosphere of a grand historic hotel, and you have the perfect setting for a ghost story to grow. In that version, Clover doesn't need to be haunting the building. The building is haunted by the story of Clover. That may sound like splitting hairs, but it matters. A person can walk into a place already knowing what they're supposed to feel. They know the hotel is historic. They know the White House is nearby. They know powerful people have stayed there. They know there's a ghost story connected to a tragic woman named Clover Adams. Once that story is in your mind, ordinary things can take on a different meaning. A light turns on or off. In another hotel, maybe you blame the wiring. At the Hay Adams, maybe you think of Clover. A door closes. In another place, maybe it's air pressure or an uneven hinge. At the Hay Adams, maybe it feels like someone just entered the room. A chandelier moves slightly. Maybe it's vibration, air movement, or the natural motion of an old building. But if you already know the legend, your mind fills in the silence. That's not an insult to witnesses. It's just part of how people experience haunted places. Human beings are meaning-making creatures. We connect dots. We look for patterns. We turn sounds into footsteps and shadows into figures. We remember stories that fit what we felt. And once a place becomes known as haunted, every strange moment becomes part of the larger legend. The almond smell is a good example. On its own, a faint almond scent in a hotel could come from perfume, food, cleaning supplies, soaps, flowers, or even something imagined after hearing the story. But because Clover's death involved potassium cyanide, and cyanide is often associated with a bitter almond odor. That scent becomes part of the haunting. The story gives the smell a direction. Skeptics would also point out that many haunted hotel stories develop this way. A tragic figure becomes attached to a location. Guests hear unexplained sounds. Staff share stories. Books repeat them. Articles retell them. Over time, the story becomes part of the identity of the place. The legend doesn't need one single event to keep it alive. It survives because people keep experiencing it, repeating it, and reshaping it. That may be exactly what happened at the Hay Adams. The hotel has the perfect ingredients: an old Washington setting, a famous name, a tragic death, an elegant building, and a haunting that's subtle enough to be believable. No dramatic monster, no bloody apparition, no wild curse. Just lights, doors, chandeliers, a scent in the air, and the idea that a woman connected to sorrow might still be near. Now, I'd like to hear from you. Have you ever stayed at the Hay Adams Hotel? Have you ever visited Lafayette Square or Rock Creek Cemetery? Or maybe you've been somewhere completely different. An old hotel, a historic home, a church, a cemetery, a theater, a place where nothing happened right in front of you, but something still felt off. Maybe you heard a sound you couldn't explain. Maybe you smelled something that seemed to come from nowhere. Maybe you felt like a room had a mood to it, like it was holding on to something from the past. If you've had an experience like that, I'd love to hear it. Call the Halloween Podcast hotline and leave us a message. Tell us your story, where it happened, and what you experienced. Your message may be featured in a future episode of Haunted Thursday. 731-400-0472. And here's this week's question. Do you think a haunting has to be tied to a building someone knew in life? Or can a place remain haunted even after the original building is gone? That's going to do it for this edition of Haunted Thursday. I hope you enjoyed our look at the history, the tragedy, the timeline, and the lingering legend of the Hay Adams Hotel and Marian Clover Adams. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow the Halloween Podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Have a good night. Sources for this episode included newspaper archives, hotel listings, historical accounts, the Massachusetts Historical Society, and published works on the history and hauntings of the Hay Adams Hotel.
Summer is here. At Orderly Meds, we know this time is a reminder that life is full of new beginnings. Whether you're celebrating the nice weather, starting a new chapter, planning a vacation, or simply looking ahead to what's next, this season can be the perfect time to invest in yourself and your health. If you've struggled with weight loss and are curious about GLP-1 medications, Orderly Meds can help you learn about your options. Through a simple virtual process, you can connect with licensed medical professionals who can determine whether treatment may be appropriate for you. Getting started is fast, convenient, and happens online from the comfort of home. This summer, consider a new approach to feeling your best. Visit orderlymeds.com/podcast to learn more. That's orderlymeds.com/podcast. orderlymeds.com/podcast. Because every new season is an opportunity to take the next step forward. Compounded medications are not FDA approved. Eligibility required and determined by a licensed provider. Individual results may vary. See website for details.